Over 2 years ago, I did a video talking about two of Super Smash Bros. Melee's unplayable characters, the male and female wireframes from Multi-Man Melee. They're clones of Captain Falcon and Zelda respectively, who are intentionally designed to be much weaker. And while the video is gone now on the account of it being, very old and bad, I will say I'm very fond of these two. I don't know, something about them really just does it for me. I might revisit them at some point, but for the time being, the Super Smash Bros. Series features some other unplayable characters that I'd like to take a look at, because, honestly, they're pretty fucking cool as well. Today, I'd like to take a look at the Fighting Alloy team from Super Smash Bros. Brawl. They're quite similar to the wireframes in a lot of ways, but they honestly surprised me with how much they have going on. Now, before I start breaking these characters down, I do have to say, if you want a place where you can very quickly reference information about these characters, or other non-playable characters in Brawl like the bosses and such, I would highly recommend checking out their Smash wiki pages. Plague Von Karma was a huge help in making this video possible, and she's done a fantastic job at doing up the wiki pages for these characters. She's a lot more familiar with Brawl than I am, so she gave me a lot of really valuable insight on this topic, and I really do appreciate it. I'd also like to thank Super Squank for making this video possible as well. On top of just being generally helpful, they caught some very important things about these characters that I would have completely missed, such as their relationship with hit stun cancelling, and the accuracy of Brawlbox's hitbox viewer. They're also responsible for the Brawl frame data sheet, an incredibly well put together resource that proved to be absolutely invaluable. So again, I'd like to extend my thanks to them. This video wouldn't have been possible without them, or Plague Von Karma. So moving on to these characters, I think it makes sense to start off with their basic traits that are shared across the four of them. Now, it only makes sense that these characters share a lot with the wireframes. I mean, they're non-playable characters that you fight in Multi-Man Melee and Multi-Man Brawl respectively. They kinda serve the same purpose. For a start, none of them have any specials. You can mash that B button as much as you want, nothing's ever gonna happen. Like the wireframes in Melee, the alloys are much larger than the characters they're based on. This gives them more range, but of course makes them easier to hit. This is kind of funny to me, because in Japan, they're actually called the small fries instead of the alloys, which is pretty neat because, they're not small. Now, one really irritating thing about the size of these characters is that it means I won't be able to perfectly convey these characters' hitboxes to you. See, as far as I'm aware, the only place where you can view these characters' hitboxes is in Brawlbox, and sadly, it's not one-to-one. Brawlbox doesn't account for the fact that these characters have a 1.5 times size modifier, so things might feel a tiny bit different in-game to what you'd expect from looking at their hitboxes. It'll definitely do the job since most moves seem to compensate for this by having very big hitboxes, but there are a handful of very funny outliers. The alloys do have a lot of interesting differences from the wireframes though, and I think one of the most obvious is the fact that there's two more of them. There are only two wireframes, the male and female ones, but there are 4 alloys. The red and blue alloys are based off Captain Falcon and Zelda, just like the wireframes were, so they're quite similar, but the yellow and green ones are based on Mario and Kirby respectively. Unlike the wireframes, who only really missed out on specials, the alloys are unfortunately missing out on several of Brawl's system mechanics. They can't shield, roll, spot dodge, grab ledge, or even air dodge. That last one is a massive deal because being unable to air dodge in Brawl means that they're unable to perform hit stun cancelling. This makes all 4 of the alloys uniquely susceptible to combos in Brawl, which is quite funny. Also, none of their aerials are super suited to breaking combos, so they're pretty fucked in that regard. The alloys do have access to all of their get up options when knocked down, including roll, funnily enough, but they're completely unable to tech. All 4 of the alloys share Wolf's unique weakness of needing 60 frames after being hit to perform a meteor cancel. For most characters this is 25 frames, going as low as 15 or as high as 32. This is obviously bad, but it might make Wolf feel a little bit better. Unlike the wireframes, the alloys are missing pretty much all of their animations related to items, though their interaction with them is very limited. They can't pick up or hold them, items like the Super Mushroom have no effect on them, but they can do things like hit the soccer ball or pick up a Starman. One absolutely massive downside compared to the wireframes is that the alloys don't have taunts or idle animations. They have, unused idle animations, but I don't know, I've been standing here for a long ass time and I'm not seeing anything, so I don't know. Unlike the two wireframes who actually had some fairly substantial differences in terms of attributes, all 4 of the alloys have completely identical attributes, with one small exception I'll touch on much later. One very interesting difference compared to the wireframes is the alloy's relationship with landing lag. In Melee, the wireframes had 15 frames of normal landing lag, and all of their aerials had 30 or 15 if you hit nail cancel, so for the most part, they would always land with 15 frames of landing lag, which was pretty fucking bad. The alloys have it better and worse. On one hand, all of their aerials have 40 frames of landing lag, which, especially in a game without L cancelling, is pretty fucking awful. It makes all of their aerials death on shield for the most part. However, they only have 3 frames of normal landing lag, which is very important considering a lot of their aerials have auto-cancel windows. Auto-cancelling your aerials would hypothetically be very important with these characters. And one last thing before I move on to the individual alloys themselves and how they differ from the characters they're based on, all 4 of the alloys have get-up attacks and trip attacks that are 100% identical to the get-up attacks and trip attacks of the characters they're based on, with the small exception of better range due to just being bigger. So I won't be mentioning them when I'm breaking down these characters individually. First things first, we have the Red Alloy, who is a clone of Captain Falcon and apparently the leader of the alloys. Good for them. Before moving on to their attacks, I do think it's worth mentioning that the Red Alloy is arguably hurt the worst by the shared attributes of the 4 alloys. Other than walk speed, which is slightly faster, all of the Red Alloy's attributes are a pretty significant downgrade from Captain Falcon's. They run slower, they're slower in the air, their full speed is worse, and they're significantly lighter. Overall, they're much worse off in this regard. Jab 1 and Jab 2 seem identical to Captain Falcon's, but Jab 3 and the Rapid Jab are where things already get a bit bizarre. Jab 3 seems objectively buffed, doing 1% more damage on the clean hit and having 3 extra active frames and higher knockback scaling. However, the Rapid Jab is an issue here because it seems like if you input Jab 3, you are always forced to transition into the Rapid Jab. This is bad because the higher knockback scaling on Jab 3 makes comboing into this less consistent, and the Rapid Jab itself has an extra 5 frames of end lag, so overall this is a bit worse, I'd say. Still, at least he actually has a Jab 3 unlike the male Wireframe, who just has their Jab 3 sitting completely unused in the game's files. Dash attack is a mixed bag. On the bright side, it's got a bigger hitbox, does more damage, doing 2% more on the clean hit and 1% more on the late hit, and now launches at a Sakurai angle for both hits. However, its base knockback is significantly decreased and it has more knockback growth, which notably makes it worse on shield. Forward tilt is super interesting to me. For Captain Falcon, if you don't angle his forward tilt, it's interruptible on frame 37 and is minus 24 on shield. However, if you do angle it, it's interruptible on frame 32, making it minus 19 on shield. For the Red Alloy, all 3 angles are interruptible on frame 37, so they're all minus 24, but the unangled version is still unique in that it's got a 4th hitbox that none of the other forward tilts have. There's a hitbox underneath the leg that does 9%. Up tilt is unfortunately just kind of worse. It has 6 extra frames of recovery, and the base knockback is lower, going from 50 to 40. Down tilt is pretty much identical to Falcon's, with the exception of slightly more range thanks to him being a big boy. Forward smash is another mixed bag. It has an extra active frame, and it has higher knockback growth, going from 85 to 100. You can angle the forward smash just like Captain Falcon's, but unlike Captain Falcon, it'll do the same amount of damage no matter what angle you use, and unfortunately, it'll always do less than Captain Falcon's, which is a little bit embarrassing. Forward smash also now sends at the Sakurai angle, which at higher percentages isn't really ideal. Up smash is a pretty fucking wild move. It's functionally pretty similar to Captain Falcon's, but it has pretty dramatically higher knockback growth, so it kills even earlier. This was not a weak move on Captain Falcon, and this is just kind of overkill, honestly. Down smash has higher knockback growth, with both hits doing 100 instead of 85 and 90 respectively, but the damage of the first hit sweet spot has been decreased by 2%, going from 18 to 16. Nair got some pretty cool buffs. It is overall much more active, with 4 extra active frames on the first hit and 8 on the second hit. Both hits do more damage, and the second hit kills much earlier because it has substantially more knockback growth. The only real downside is that, like back air, it auto-cancels 2 frames later. Fair is pretty similar to the male Wireframe's Nair, in that it doesn't have a sweet spot, just an early hit and a late hit, but it's much better than the male Wireframes. The early hit always does 13%, and the late hit always does 10%. An early hit kills much later than Captain Falcon's sweet spot knee, but still, the consistency is nice. The early hit of back air has 2 extra active frames, but to compensate, the early hit does 2% less, and the late hit does 1% less. Up air is pretty much identical to Falcon's. It's a bit of a shame because the male wireframes was pretty substantially different thanks to the extra active frames, but it is what it is. I want to save down air for last because it's actually really fucking cool, so we'll very quickly get grabs and throws out of the way. There's not a whole lot to talk about. All of the Red Alloy's grabs are identical to Captain Falcon's, and 3 of his throws are identical. Up throw, down throw, and back throw are completely identical to Captain Falcon's, while forward throw has one minuscule change. Its hitbox is active 1 frame sooner. I don't really think that changes anything, but it's a difference. The Red Alloy's down air is fucking awesome. It's pretty substantially different from Falcon's. Well, at least Brawl Falcon's, that is. If we take a look at Brawl Falcon's down air, there's a hitbox on the feet that is a meteor smash, and one on the body that launches away. However, if we take a look at the Red Alloy's down air, there are 3 hitboxes, all of which launch down, with one on the chest that launches down and away slightly. This is pretty different from Brawl Falcon, but it's actually extremely reminiscent of Melee Falcon's down air. Now, as cool as it is to see the iconic nipple spike hitbox, it's not a true spike in Brawl just because Brawl doesn't have spikes outside of boss characters. But still, this is really neat. Also, this is more of a crackpot theory rather than anything else, but me and Plague Von Karma were talking about this, and we kinda came to the conclusion that maybe instead of being an intentional reference to Melee Falcon's down air, maybe Brawl Falcon's down air was just also like this at some point in Brawl's development. Like, rather than this being an intentional reference to Melee Falcon, this is just what Brawl Falcon's down air could have been before someone felt like doing this to it for some reason. It's just a theory, and it would explain a lot of the arbitrary changes to these characters, but I don't know, it's fun to think about. Next up we have the Blue Alloy, who is a clone of Zelda, and thus kind of reminiscent of the female wireframe from Melee. In Melee, the female wireframe definitely felt worse than the male wireframe, and I think that's kind of the same here. I have a funny feeling that out of the 4 alloys, the Blue Alloy is the weakest. She just feels super cluunky, and a lot of the few strengths that Zelda does have in Brawl just aren't present here at all. Unlike Zelda's, which is a multi-hit, the Blue Alloy's jab only hits once. It only does 4% and the knockback is quite low. It does have a larger hitbox that extends down a bit further, but overall this is pretty bad. Dash attack is a pretty interesting one. Both the early and late hits of Zelda's dash attack have a sweet spot on the body that does more damage than the sour spot in front of her. However, on the Blue Alloy, both hitboxes are functionally identical, and they're very similar to the sweet spot of Zelda's dash attack. The only difference is the launch angle, which is always 70 for the Blue Alloy. Forward tilt is a pretty quirky little move. Unlike Zelda's forward tilt, which has 3 different hitboxes which do 11, 12, and 13% respectively, the Blue Alloy's forward tilt has 4 hitboxes that function identically, all doing 12%. Where this move really gets interesting in my opinion is the frame data. Now unfortunately it's got 10 extra frames of recovery, which is pretty fucking bad, but what's kinda cool about the Blue Alloy's forward tilt is that it hits a frame earlier than Zelda's, on frame 11 rather than frame 12. Now, I have a little bit of a theory about this move. It really looks like Zelda's forward tilt should hit you on frame 11, but I have a funny feeling that at one point it did, like the Blue Alloys, but they slowed Zelda's forward tilt down by a frame so it would be 1 frame slower than her frame 11 jab. It's just a theory, it's just an idea, but I don't know, maybe. Up tilt has a ton of little nerfs that really add up. It's 2 frames slower, the hitbox are active for 2 frames less, the move does 2% less damage, the hitboxes are smaller, and the move as a whole has 7 extra frames of recovery. Not great. Down tilt got absolutely fucking destroyed. Now, first of all, it has 3 less active frames, which, you know, not a big deal, but it's not great. But the main issue here is the fact that the move has an extra 30 frames of recovery. Zelda's down tilt can be interrupted on frame 25, so this move takes over twice as long to recover as Zelda's. It's kind of wild. Forward smash is kind of a similar deal to jab in that it's gone from a multi-hit to just a single strike. It has 10 extra frames of recovery, but other than that, it's pretty fine. It has slightly less knockback scaling, but the improved consistency is kinda nice. Up smash is interesting, but overall kind of scuffed.
It hits twice, and if both hits connect, it does 24%, which is pretty neat, but the move is 4 frames slower, has less knockback, and the hitboxes on it are pretty piss poor. Down smash is near identical to Zelda's, but both hits have 1 extra active frame, and the knockback is slightly higher. I have a funny feeling maybe Zelda's down smash was like this at some point in development, and this is just, a leftover from that. Just like Jab 1 and F smash, Nair has gone from a multi-hitting move to just a move that hits once. It hits once on frames 6 to 20 for 8% with low knockback, and the move doesn't get any weaker over time. It's not great, honestly. Forward air and back air are really cool to me because with the exception of some small differences in their auto-cancel windows and back air hitting 3 frames sooner, they're kind of the exact same move in a way. The sweet spot is gone, so it's kind of like the red alloys forward air now, like both kicks are just very okay but they don't have sweet spots or sour spots. Forward air has 10 extra frames of recovery and back air has 14, so now they have the exact same recovery, and both moves are functionally very similar, so I don't know. They're both just really, really okay now. Up air is pretty unremarkable. It's active for 1 less frame, does 2% less damage, and the hitbox is unfortunately less disjointed than Zelda's. It's a very, very unremarkable move. Down air got a similar treatment to forward air and back air. It's still meteor smashes, but it's not a particularly strong one. It's got no sweet spot and it's active for 6 less frames. All of the blue alloys' grabs and their pommel are identical to Zelda's, but their throws are a little bit strange. They're nearly identical, but for some reason, all 4 of them have extra recovery frames. Forward throw, back throw, and up throw all have an extra 10 frames of recovery, and down throw has an extra 5. I'm not really sure why they felt the need to do this, it's just pretty rough, honestly. Overall, this character in general is quite rough. They are faster than Zelda for the most part, thanks to the universal attributes these characters have, but overall, they're super clunky, and their moves just don't feel great. It's a shame this character doesn't have Zelda's specials, because if there's a character in this game that would want to turn into Sheik, it's this one. Starting with the yellow alloy, this character's pretty funny because they are very based on Mario, since not only does his moveset come from Mario, but his attributes do as well. All of the alloys use Mario's attributes as a framework, with the only difference being their meteor cancel window. So this guy will feel pretty familiar if you give him a try. Moving on to attacks, the yellow alloy is terribly unfortunate when it comes to their jabs. Mario's Jab 1 and Jab 2 have a hitbox on the fist that launch the opponent at an 80-degree angle, which is ideal for comboing into the other hits of Jab. However, the yellow alloy was not so lucky. First of all, every hitbox on Jab 1 and Jab 2 launches at a Sakurai angle, and Jab 1 and 2 both have worst weight-based knockback, which makes it more likely for the opponent to be able to shield between the hits of Jab 1 and 2 or 2 and 3. You're in trouble if they do shield Jab 3 as well, because it's got an extra 10 frames of end lag, so it's much worse on shield. Jab 3 also has slightly less knockback growth, but interestingly, it actually comes out a frame faster, hitting on frame 6 instead of frame 7. What I find especially interesting about this is that it's also got a slightly different animation to Mario's Jab 3. The yellow alloy extends their leg a frame sooner than Mario does to match the hitbox coming out a frame sooner, which is pretty interesting. It makes you wonder if Mario's Jab 3 was like this at some point in Brawl's development. Dash attack has some tiny differences, but it's functionally the same as Mario's. It's still got that goofy hitbox that can hit below the stage and cause stage spikes, which is pretty funny. Forward tilt does 2% more damage, but it's got 8 extra frames of recovery, and its base knockback has gone from 8 or 13 depending on angle, to always 6 regardless of angle. Up tilt is just kind of funny more than anything. It is so close to being identical to Mario's, but it has 1 extra frame of recovery. Why? I don't know. It just does. Down tilt is pretty similar, but all 3 hitboxes do 7% instead of the ones on the body and leg doing 7 and the one on the foot doing 5 like Mario's. It's slightly improved, although apparently Mario's down tilt is one of the worst moves in Brawl, so nothing major. Forward smash is a bit of a weird one. There's no sweet spots or sour spots anymore, it just always does 15% and the same amount of knockback, no matter what. It's also got an extra 9 frames of recovery, but it does have 2 extra active frames, which is kind of neat, I guess. Now it has 4 active frames, like Melee's forward smash. An epic Melee reference, perhaps? Up smash is mostly similar, but has 1 key upside and 1 key downside. The knockback scaling has increased from 90 to 97, making it noticeably stronger at higher percents, but unfortunately it's lost the head invincibility from frames 9 to 14. Down smash is probably the prime example of Brawlbox unfortunately not being a one-to-one representation of the hitboxes of the alloys. It has slightly less base knockback and slightly more knockback scaling, but the real issue here is the range. The hitbox in Brawlbox looks massive, but in-game there's no hitbox on the feet, so this move is a little bit sad really. The range on this move is so underwhelming that it actually single-handedly made me realize something was up with the hitbox comparisons from Brawlbox to in-game. A lot of the time you don't really feel the difference, but this one sticks out like a sore thumb. Nair's early hit does 2% more damage and the late hit has an extra active frame. It seems like a straight upgrade, and then you remember the whole 40 frames of landing lag thing. That's definitely an issue. Forward air is an entirely different move. It can't meteor smash in any capacity, so essentially it's like a weaker Dr. Mario forward air. It's a pretty cute nod, although it is a little disappointing just how much weaker it is than Dr. Mario's forward air. Back air is interesting. Mario's back air has an early hit from frames 6 to 8 and a late hit from frames 9 to 13. The yellow alloy's back air has no late hit, but the duration of the early hit has been extended from frames 6 to 8 to 6 to 12. Other than that, the changes are minor. It does 1% less damage going from 12 to 11, and the knockback scaling is slightly increased, going from 95 to 100. Up air has 4 extra frames of recovery and its launch angle has been changed from 45 degrees to 55 degrees. Is that good? I don't know, but it's different. Down air is nearly identical with the small difference that the landing hit is now gone. I'm choosing to interpret this as another epic Dr. Mario reference because it was the exact same case for Dr. Mario compared to Mario in Melee. Yellow alloy's grabs are mostly identical to Mario's, except that dash grab is actually a frame faster. Pummel is also completely identical to Mario's. As for throws, forward throw is identical, up throw has 1 extra frame of recovery, down throw has 8 extra frames of recovery and less knockback growth, and back throw is interesting because it has more knockback. Substantially more actually, it's a pretty surprisingly good kill throw. Overall the yellow alloy is pretty neat. They're not very remarkable in any capacity, but it's fun to talk about a new non-playable character that isn't related to the wireframes in any way, and there's still some pretty interesting changes here, especially with forward air and down air. That does a lot for me. Next up we have the green alloy, who is a clone of Kirby, and out of the 4 alloys, definitely the one that me and Plague Von Karma talked about the most. This little guy's pretty neat, and we're pretty sure that out of the 4 of them, this is the strongest alloy for sure. Now don't get me wrong, compared to normal characters they're still very weak. At the end of the day they can't shield, air dodge, they're just missing out on too many important mechanics to ever be anything close to good. But still, they're pretty neat in their own right. One notable thing about the green alloy right off the bat is that, unlike the red alloy, I think they actually benefit from sharing most of Mario's attributes. Compared to Kirby, they run faster, they walk faster, they have a faster dash speed. They've actually come out pretty well here. The only things that are noticeably worse are that their jump squad is a frame slower and that their air acceleration is lower. On the whole, they're doing pretty good here. They're also a lot heavier, which I'm aware is a mixed bag, but still pretty notable. Also, I mentioned earlier that there's one exception to all 4 of the alloys having the exact same attributes, and that's thanks to the green alloy. Unlike the rest of them, the green alloy has 5 mid-air jumps instead of 2, just like Kirby. Having 5 mid-air jumps is pretty cool because it automatically gives the green alloy the closest thing to an actual recovery out of all the alloys. Still not great, like you've no up B, you can't grab ledge, but look, these guys will take anything they can get. Moving on to individual attacks, the green alloy shares a lot of the same issues as the yellow alloy in that their jabs have received a bunch of changes that just kind of make it less consistent overall. Jab 1 transitions to Jab 2 a frame later, and all of Jab 1, Jab 2, and Rapid Jab have higher knockback growth, which just makes it easier for the opponent to escape, unfortunately. At the very least, Jab 2 does 1% more damage, which is something, I guess. Dash attack is functionally a completely different move. It now hits once instead of being a multi-hit attack. This does make it less vulnerable to SDI, which is kinda nice, but overall it's a little bit weak. It only does 6%, and the knockback is considerably lower. It always has 100 knockback growth, but the base knockback is much worse, going from 90 or 70 to 30. It's also got 5 extra frames of recovery, which combined with the attack being quite weak, just makes it really, really bad on shield. Forward tilt has 2 very simple changes. It's gone from doing 8 or 7% to 9%, but it has 5 extra frames of recovery, so overall it's slightly worse on shield. Up tilt has 3 extra frames of recovery, but it has slightly higher knockback growth. Also, notably, just because it's on a bigger character, it can now hit through platforms like the ones on Battlefield, which is kind of neat, I guess. Down tilt is nearly identical, but now it always does 5% instead of 5 on the body and 6 on the foot. Forward smash has a bunch of really strange little changes. The late hit is very similar to Kirby's, having very similar properties and hitting on frames 17 to 21, just like Kirby. However, the early hit is a frame slower and deactivates a frame sooner, going from frames 12 to 16 to 13 to 15. No matter which way you angle it, it's always very similar to Kirby's unangled forward smash, with the only difference being that it has a different launch angle, now launching at a Sakurai angle, and having higher base knockback, going from 38 to 45. Up smash no longer has feet invincibility from frames 14 to 24, and the weaker clean hitbox now does 1% less damage. The clean hit also always has 30 base knockback instead of 34 or 30. However, the late hit now does 1 more damage, which is kind of nice. Also, because the green alloy is just bigger than Kirby, up smash now covers an entire Battlefield platform instead of just about reaching it, which, I don't know, I thought that was kinda interesting. Down smash has a bunch of little changes. The feet invincibility from frames 5 to 14 is gone, the clean hit deals 1 less damage, the late hit lasts 2 frames longer, but the knockback growth on the sour spot has slightly decreased. Neutral air is very nearly identical to Kirby's, but it's got 7 extra frames of recovery. The first and third hit of fair do 1% more damage and it auto-cancels slightly earlier, but it has 6 extra frames of recovery and the knockback growth on the last hit is slightly lower. Back air has 3 extra frames of recovery and it has slightly less knockback growth on both the early and late hits, but it does auto-cancel 1 frame sooner. Up air is pretty cool. It does 1% more damage and both the base knockback and knockback growth have increased, so it's better as a kill move, especially while edge guarding, because the launch angle has changed from 70 degrees to a Sakurai angle, which is much better for launching opponents towards the horizontal blast zones. As a trade-off, it has 8 extra recovery frames, and interestingly, it's missing an active frame, meaning it no longer hits below and behind Kirby. The green alloy, who do I think I am? Down air is nearly identical. The multi-hits have slightly less knockback scaling, and the launch angle on the landing hit has gone from 30 degrees to a Sakurai angle. Now all of the green alloy's grabs and their pommel are completely identical to Kirby's, but it's throws where things get kind of interesting. Now, the green alloy's down throw and back throw are completely identical to Kirby's, so there's nothing to talk about there, but their up throw and their forward throw are extremely different from Kirby's. And that's mostly because they never were Kirby's. Surprisingly enough, the green alloy's forward and up throw are actually taken from Jigglypuff. I can kind of understand why they changed up throw, because Kirby has one of those ones that takes you off screen, which, I don't know, maybe in multi-man Brawl that would be a bit much, but I'm not really sure why they changed forward throw. There wasn't really anything wrong or distracting about Kirby's forward throw, but still interesting. The green alloy's forward throw is very similar to Jigglypuff's. The only difference is that it does 2% less damage. Up throw's changes are a bit more plentiful. For a start, it's now weight independent, so it has a consistent first active frame of 42 instead of being dependent on how heavy the opponent is. It also throws the opponent 2 frames sooner, on frame 9 instead of frame 11, and it has less base knockback but higher knockback growth, going from 110 to 70 and 30 to 70 respectively. So that's the green alloy. I know I didn't get too hyped up about anything here, but at the end of the day, they've got a bunch of moves that are like relatively fast, relatively safe, decently powerful, cover a good amount of their body, and they're the only one of the alloys to have something close to a recovery, which, you know, that's something at least. They're probably the strongest alloy, I'm almost certain of it. So, that's it. We've talked about 4 of Super Smash Bros. Brawl's non-playable characters, the Fighting Alloy team. And they're pretty fucking dreadful. They might even be weaker than Melee's wireframes because even though on the whole their moves are much better, missing out on things so integral to the game as shielding, air dodge, grabbing ledge, that's pretty fucking hard to look past. Still, as weak as these characters are, nonetheless, I think they're really, really charming.
I love stupid little non-playable characters like this. They're just so silly. They're full of like weird little changes that mean nothing really in isolation, but I don't know, I just think they're really, really neat. Overall, I had a ton of fun talking about these characters, and I'd love to talk about more non-playable characters in the future. I hope you had a lot of fun with this as well, and I'll catch you next time. Also, I didn't know where else to put this, but none of the alloys can swim. They just go through the water. So, yeah, there's that too.